So, round two, story. So what do you guys love about the story of your film? So that covers its plot, the themes, the twists, etc. And are there any narrative problems or flaws with the other two films? So I thought I'd start this one off and then let Jacob start round three because I know he's really going to enjoy talking about that one. So I'll start off with a Soho story. So Soho explores some very timely themes, which is something that Edgar Wright hasn't really done in his previous films, especially not to this extent. So the main theme of this film is nostalgia. So Ellie has a great arc of learning to not romanticize the 60s and maybe strike a more healthy balance. And I think this is a good message. Let's remember the past, but also remember how far we've come and not go back there completely. A good indication of this is the ending, when we see all her dresses on the fashion runway. She hasn't abandoned the 60s designs completely. If she had, then the message would be, all nostalgia is bad. We should completely live in the present. But instead, there have been some contemporary updates, and the Downtown song has a modern remix. So, I think they're saying that you don't need to let the past die completely. You can strike a more healthy balance, and that there's stuff in the past that's still worth holding on to, that still has a place in the modern world. And leading directly on from this theme, the treatment of women in both the past and the present. So we talked about Edgar Wright's female characters in the past, but I feel like his decision to have a female protagonist here doesn't feel like a course correction or arbitrary. I don't think the story would have been nearly as effective with a male main character. Throughout the film, there's all these little moments of Ellie being harassed by various male characters. So, the scene in the taxi, or that scene in the student bar where Jocasta's trying to direct some pervert onto her to deflect because he's hitting on her. And it all serves a purpose. It makes us understand why a young woman and who's dealing with all this stuff and having a lack of support amongst her female peers will want to go back to the 60s, where men were supposedly, they all had honor, they were all gentlemen, and then having her discover that the 60s were even worse is, I think, the film's way of saying that yes, not enough has changed, but let's spare a thought for the women of the past who had it even harder, who had even less of a support system, and why we definitely don't want to go back to this period. Also, I'd like to talk about the twist again. So using an anecdote, do you remember when we saw this in the cinema, Harry, with our friend Charlie?
Yes, I remember that.
So there's the scene with the old guy, Terence Stamp. When I think it's I think at the start of the second act where he confronts Ellie and he says, "Oh, which way you going, girl?" I think at that point Charlie whispered into my ear, "That guy's Matt Smith in the present." I was just like, "Oh, damn! I think you've cracked it already, Charlie."
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And obviously, that's exactly what Edgar Wright wanted us to think. It was a double bluff. And when in reality, it's actually Sandy who's still alive in the present. And, there's a lot of there's a really interesting twist and thematic weight behind that. So, one more point about the story. Some people didn't like how the cause of Ellie's powers wasn't really explained, but I really like this. It meant that, we can come up with our own interpretation. It's kind of like, the Force in Star Wars. It's better when it wasn't explained with midichlorians and that you could just have your own interpretation for what it was. I think the consensus is that it's a mental health allegory, but my take is that it's a manifestation of being an artist and the creative process. So, her grandma calls it her gift, and that because she's able to feel things so strongly and empathize with others. And you can see how this can be a blessing. She's very passionate about her work and, makes amazing designs, but a curse as well, because, she obsesses over helping Sandy and leads to her own suffering through her mental health. So that's my...
Oh, yeah. Sorry, so are you finished? I didn't know if you were...
Yeah, all done, yeah. I was about to hand over to you anyway.
Oh, that's fine. I was just going to bring up a point. I guess we can discuss it a bit more, but my only, my gripe with that in Last Night in Soho is the fact that, it's sort of alluded to the fact that it's a mental illness, but the sort of main sort of starting point at the start of the film is meant to be related to her mum. The fact that she passed away and she can see, are you seeing her again? Her grandmother's talking about her mum. Her mum does not appear and is not mentioned at all for the rest of the film until the very end, and that's sort of I don't know. I feel like that's kind of a slight issue in the sense that I thought that maybe she would appear more, or like have more, like she'd have more of a conversation with her grandmother, saying about the fact that like is it due to her mum or something. But she's never mentioned again until the last like few frames of the film. Which
You're right that she doesn't appear until the end of the film after the first like 10 minutes.
Which I guess maybe that's a sort of like a sort of circle of the fact that she's, even though she's seeing her, she's in a much better place again. Which maybe that's that. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that might be that. Yeah, I'll take that as my defense, Harry. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I was like, you've got the gun with no ammo, and I've just given you more like the ammo.
Yep,
to
thank you very much, Harry. But yeah, like I feel like at the start of the film where she's seeing visions of her mum, this is like a positive thing. It's like it's great that she's able to like see visions of her mum, and then like when she gets to London, suddenly this gift is like corrupted. When she's being traumatized by lots of different visions. So I guess it's like a way of showing her like state of mind.
Yeah.
Or at the end when she sees Sandy in the mirror. I thought that was great for the themes too, or the story, because like it's a way of showing that now she's living for both Sandy and her mum, because both of them weren't able to achieve their dreams because of the world they were living in. So Ellie's now aware that she's definitely not had it easy, but she's aware of the women who've come before her and is now living for both of them. So that was my interpretation. So Hot Fuzz's story, Harry.
Yes. So in terms of like the way Hot Fuzz handles its story, it is the definition of big fish in a small pond. Like it's a top police officer going into a quiet, or seemingly quiet, village. That's he's obviously too well equipped for. Like he's too like sort of used to the city style of crime, whereas like you go from the start of the film where he's dealing with like riot, right? Where he's part of like the riot squad, and he's like dealing with like people with knives and things, and then the first sort of thing he does in terms of addressing a crime in the village is the swan has escaped, which I think is a hilarious sort of like comparison to what like the sort of range that he's dealing with, and like how he comes to terms with that. But like I think the mystery behind everything, like in the town, how nothing is what it seems and things, and how he's constantly being told no, there's nothing going on, when there is always something going on, which is always like that's a key thing about the film, how it's like no matter how normal it sort of seems wherever you are, there's always something behind closed doors. And I think that's a great way that they portray this. Like they make Timothy Dalton seem like, oh, he's obviously the villain. Similar way to sort of they see Jack in Last Night in Soho. It's like, oh, he's obviously the villain. Our case closed. Oh, we'll just he's obviously bad. Like we'll just keep an eye out for him. But the way that they sort of explore how it's not just him, it's this whole village, this sort of society they've sort of formed, and that is so sort of sadistic in the way that they're trying to just win Village of the Year, which is like, if someone told you that without seeing the film, you'd think, what stupid silly concept, but like it's handled so well. And the in terms of like the way, like the pace of the film, I think it's a 2-hour film from what I remember, and it's paced wonderfully. Like how it gives you that action-packed start at the first opening minute or so, where it shows what Angel was used to, and then it shows what he deals with at the village and meeting everyone in the village and stuff. Yeah, I think in terms of like the big fish in a small pond plot point, I think it's good that he comes to terms of where he is, like, and comes to grow as a character, but also bring in that experience that he had being in the city and working for the police in central London, and what he's dealt with. And I think it's really well handled, and the fact that this whole sort of village society leads up to the inspector of the village, how it leads right up to the top. I think it's, again, that's another great twist where it's sort of like another twist within while a twist is already happening. I think it's genius. There's already a twist where it's like, oh, it's the whole town, oh, everyone's in on it, and then like just after that you get the second twist where the inspector,
Yeah. Because like Jim
Frank,
Broadbent's
is
character, he felt like so like comic relief and like
yeah, and
non-threatening, and then to
lovable,
then
yeah,
like have
like
him revealed as the top guy. Yeah, I agree.
and then like ended up being sort of the most sadistic one, and just how it gets to the point where he's doing this for his wife, how his wife only like cared so much about the Village of the Year competition, and when she died, that was that was her legacy, and that's what he's sort of blinded by, and will do anything to win that. That's why like it's great towards the end of the film when Nick Frost, like his son, like Danny, he confronts him saying, imagine like Mum would have killed herself all over again if she's seen what you become now, and just the sort of like the obsession that he's got with this, like mourning over his wife and things. I think is handled really well.
Jacob, why do you think Baby Driver has the best story?
Okay, I love the story of Baby Driver. I think it has, broadly speaking, a pretty straightforward structure as an action film, but I think the ways that the conflict is expressed are somewhat unpredictable. I mentioned earlier, I think, about Buddy, John Hamm's character, sneaking up on you as the final villain. I don't think you really expect that that's going to be the case the first time you watch it until it's kind of upon you. So I wanted to talk about the conflict because I think that drives any and every good story. And I think it's one of the key differences between the way Baby Driver functions and the way the other two films do. So the internal struggle of the film, the internal conflict, is a fairly familiar one to us. You've got the hero in uh, in the world of crime, so he's somewhat of an anti-hero when we first meet him. Of course, he's the getaway driver for bank robberies. There's a line early on in the film. His foster dad says to him, "You don't belong in this world," and he signs it to him, I should say. And that's the central theme of the movie, is Baby being trapped between a world that he knows he doesn't belong in and a chance to escape from it. That alone isn't a film. We need an external representation of that conflict, and that's where I think this film shines, because at any given moment in the film, the external conflict is with someone completely different, but there's always one going on. In the opening scenes, that push-pull of you don't belong in this world, but of course he's trapped in it. That's manifested wholly in Doc, Kevin Spacey's character. He's 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 got him in a vice, essentially. He has to do everything that he wants because of all the money that Baby owes him. He totaled his car years ago. Going forward, we start to feel more of a tension between Baby and Bat, Jamie Foxx's character. He's the loose cannon, and he's just out to hurt anybody at any time. And kind of how John Bernthal's character functions in that one scene. And we have to give a nod to his last line in the movie: "If you don't see me again, it's because I'm dead." And we don't see him again. It's brilliant. Bats turns up, and he's now the villain of the movie. He's causing so much grief for Baby. There's that song playing, "Nowhere to Run to, Baby," while they're driving to the cafe, because right now it's Bats driving them around. He's got Baby trapped in this world. So the external manifestation of the internal conflict is very clear, very precise. And of course then the vengeful Buddy, who's just out to get Baby, out to take from him what was taken it from Buddy, which is who he's in love with, Deborah. That's the final external conflict. I think somewhat of the downfall of Last Night in Soho and Hot Fuzz in terms of their story, particularly in terms of how their stories function having seen the whole thing and on repeat viewing. It's intrinsic to their genre, which is the mystery of it. There's certainly a blend of so many genres in all of Edgar Wright's films, but mystery plays a big part in Hot Fuzz and in Last Night in Soho, which means that the conflict of the movie externally isn't manifested in a character so clearly. It's not one character's goals and hopes and dreams against another's so particularly. It's more that the characters are trying to discover things mostly on their own. There are barriers to them, but you don't get a chance for them to hit a brick wall that is another character with opposing ideologies and opposing ways of being in the world, as Baby does. He gets to see what he might be like if he grows up, if he continues on in this world so clearly in all these other characters. I think the emphasis on mystery in Last Night in Soho and in Hot Fuzz kind of prevents them from having real conflict and real antagonists in the way that Baby Driver does. Another key element of storytelling, and it's a necessary evil, is exposition. And there's a moment early on in Baby Driver exemplifying how well done the exposition is in the film and how it's kept very succinct, very minimal. We all know that scene. We've seen it in 100 movies where a group of bank robbers are huddled in a warehouse planning their next heist. And instead of having us hear the plan, we don't hear anything but the music in Baby's ears. And through the cinematography and the editing, we infer that he's reading Doc's lips. And in a really cool mic drop moment, he recites it back in Jamie Foxx's Bats in his face when he's accused of not really listening, not really being in the room. And I think that's brilliant, because what he is doing is telling the audience what the plan is for the heist. But we're not aware that that's the function of the moment, because we're so caught up in how clever the dynamic is between the characters in the scene. There's a little bit of a necessity to have too much exposition in a film that hinges on mystery. And I think with Last Night in Soho, for example, Diana Rigg essentially bringing out a map and laying out the plot of the entire movie for the protagonist at the end, and Nick Frost's character in Hot Fuzz being posited as such a comic. He's so clueless that he's there to be told everything so that we as the audience can hear it. And I think exposition is a real factor in how these films are distinguished from one another in terms of how the stories are told. And so those are my two kind of favorite things about Baby Driver in comparison to the other two. It's the way it handles its storytelling, its exposition, and the way it manifests its conflict externally, the way we get a really strong character versus character antagonism. How about you, Gary? What are your thoughts?
One thing that I think, in terms of story, that Hot Fuzz and Baby Driver lack is something in the way of like a deeper theme or subtext. So, like, particularly in Baby Driver's case, what you see on the surface is what you get. You know, it's the film. So the entire plot of the film can be boiled down to crime doesn't pay. And that's not to say, like, I'm not saying that a film has to have a deep meaning in order to be valid or a good film, but I give extra props to Soho for like tackling deeper themes, particularly as it's something that hasn't really happened before in an Edgar Wright film. I will say that Hot Fuzz has a hint of subtext. So, the whole the neighborhood watch being obsessed with like this old image of England that they really want to preserve. But this theme feels a bit more coincidental. You could watch Hot Fuzz and this could easily go over your head, whilst you can't watch Soho and miss the points that it's trying to make. And another thing is that, like, Baby Driver is an outstandingly made action film. Like, it's like a top tier one, but at the end of the day, it's an action film. It's it doesn't really subvert the genre. Like, it's just an incredibly well made, as good as it gets popcorn flick, but it comes with all the trappings of a popcorn flick. At the end of the day, Hot Fuzz is just a spoof of a cop drama, albeit an outstandingly made one.
Yeah, that's fair. Like, where I'd say that maybe like Baby Driver is not like a typical action film is the start, like the opening car chase. Is like, I've never seen anything that sort of extravagant in terms of, but like feels so like in the real world. You know what I mean? So it's like you have films like Fast and Furious that just do something absolutely ridiculous and stupid with a car, like jumping a building into like a helicopter or something like that, or The Rock pulling down a plane or something stupid. Like, it's they do it in such a way where, for me personally, I can see where you get popcorn enjoyment out of it, but I just don't have any sort of, like, I don't like that sort of thing, because I feel like it's got to be somewhat grand in reality to make it sort of more impactful and make me care. That's why I think like the opening of Baby Driver, him doing that sort of drift between the truck that's reversing and like that feels like, and it feels like a real move because it was a real move, like in a car. Like, it feels like different to like just a typical sort of maybe like a James Bond chase or something. But I guess like that is, I think that's where I'd agree with Gary in the sense that it's only there, and I get driving is his thing, and like he does do a lot of driving. He does do driving tricks like in the film and things, but I feel like they sort of, in terms of that, or like covering that sort of sense, they almost like blew their load too early.
That's fair.
I feel like the way like one of the like Gary said about it being a spoof, Hot Fuzz, is the fact that they're still even though he's changed so much, and by the end of the film Angel just says, all right, okay, the only way this village is going down is if I take the fight to them. The genius part is that he's still technically following the police's rules because he doesn't kill a single person, despite some of the stuff he puts, like a man gets a like the bar, one of the bar owners like gets a bear trap on his neck. It's like you would not live that in real life, but it's kind of funny. Like, you look back and you see that he's sort of being arrested with that thing attached to his head. But it's where it's like that sort of spoof, but like it's fun in the sense that he's still sort of following these principles, and he's not like sort of forgotten his roots, but he's just grown from where he was at the start.
Do you think this is a fair criticism, Jacob?
Yeah, absolutely. I think though you're right in that it is, if it is just an action movie, it's pretty much a perfect one. And when we get onto style, there's more to be said about the action in the film.
It's like things like when Harry mentioned the Fast and Furious films, I'm thinking, yeah, this is like, okay, yeah, let's not take Baby Driver for granted. It puts films like that to shame.
That's what I mean.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the precision with which everything is put together is unbelievable, and I think that's how he writes all of his films. But with Baby Driver, he wrote it that way, and he filmed it that way, and he edited it that way, and he edited the sound that way, and it's like it all contributes to that snappy, witty, punchy, precise tone.
It feels unique as well. Like whereas like I was saying, Fast and Furious feels like a sort of factory made product where it just feels like any. Like I could watch a clip from any of those films and I wouldn't know which one it is. They've made like 9 of them, and I wouldn't be able to tell you like what film it is, just because they're all the same. Whereas this, Baby Driver feels so much more unique in that sense.
I love how 9 isn't even an exaggeration for those films.
No, I know,
There are
it is
9 of
9.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah. For now.
Yeah,
So
9 and
that
counting.
is true. Until they do a Jurassic Park crossover, because apparently that is happening.
Oh god.
So, round 3. You ready for this, Jacob? Style. So, this final round is about all the fun stuff we love in Edgar Wright films. So, quirky editing, use of music, cool transitions. So, Jacob, why is Baby Driver Edgar Wright's finest hour stylistically?
I think this really is a no contest. We were just discussing the precision of the film a minute ago, and that's everything about it comes from how amazing the style of this film is. I said it earlier that there are 2 scenes, the first 2 scenes of the film, the second one just being one shot that tell you everything you need to know. You've got one of the most amazing French Connection-esque car chases I've ever seen on film, all done exactly how we're seeing it. As you said, Harry, it's a real car. It's all taking place as we see it in camera. And every scene in the film, the word choreographed is applicable. If it's just 2 people walking round a room, if it's baby putting coffee down on a table, there's things I didn't realise were synced to the music until I saw the film 5 times. You'll hear sirens in the background, gunshots, dialogue, footsteps, the weather. Everything about the movie is coordinated and choreographed. It's the absolute pinnacle of style, and it certainly deserved all the editing related awards that it was nominated for and won, etc. And it all works so perfectly together. It's all built into Baby as a character, that he listens to music, and so that's how he perceives the world in music. So it's not just a cheap excuse to do that. There's a justification for it, grounded in the reality of the characters. So when I think of Baby Driver, the image of it in my head is so vibrant, it's so bright. I think of red cars, and the costumes are extravagant. Everybody has their own kind of color scheme, and it's very bright, it's very high contrast, it's a very vibrant, colourful film that just contributes to that whole fun vibe. I do have to say, with regards to Last Night in Soho, when I picture it, it is a much more dreary film. I think its most stylistic moment is that dance scene. It's a lot of long sweeping takes, and you can see the 2 female leads switching. I think that's happening in camera, and it's really cool.
Do you know how they did that, you guys?
Are they kind of hiding behind the camera?
There's no like editing in that almost. Like they just have one of either Thomas and Mackenzie or Anya Taylor-Joy just hide
they just
behind the
run
camera.
out.
They just literally just link
Oh,
arms
that's
and swap
incredible.
with Matt
I
Smith.
genuinely thought it was just like
honestly,
they've done
the
it twice and
behind the
cut it
scenes of
together.
that is like the behind the scenes of that is almost as good as the actual shot.
That is really impressive. But I do think it is the shining moment in the film, and there's about 10 of those in Baby Driver. It's like we all remember the scene in Shaun of the Dead where they're hitting the zombies in time to the Queen song.
Yeah.
And he made a whole film of it with Baby Driver. I think he just
That's a good point.
turned it up to 11. It's my favourite thing about his films, and he went for it in every scene with this one.
So, I will do a Soho style next. A common criticism of Edgar Wright's films is that they're often called style over substance. But in Soho's case, I'd say the style serves the substance. So we can talk about the music first. So as you guys know, I'm a sucker for pop songs being reused in scenes in films. And Soho has my favourite soundtrack in an Edgar Wright film yet. I really like it because the soundtrack could have easily just been like Suicide Squad and like, oh, she's on a train to London, let's play London Calling by The Clash or something like that. But like by fully committing to the 60s aesthetic, you know, we're drawn into the period setting more effectively. It's like the soundtrack is the narrator of the story. You know, it ties into the plot and the theme seamlessly. Now, I could like nerd out over every song on this soundtrack, but I've decided to just pick one because it could take up the entire runtime. So I thought I'd pick out the song "Puppet on a String." Do you remember the scene in the
yes,
nightclub?
Yeah, that's a good
Or rather,
scene.
the gentleman's club. Yeah. So the song marks a turning point in the film where it stops like being a love letter to the 60s, where we begin to see, all's not what it seems. I was reading up on this song, and apparently Sandy Shaw, the artist who sang it originally, hated Puppet on a String. She called it sexist drivel, and she was like forced to do it for Eurovision by her management because it had been written to deliberately pander to European audiences. So I don't think it's a coincidence that Edgar Wright's used the song in this scene in this manner. You know, it's like I feel like there's some poetic justice to the fact that now like an entire generation of people are going to associate this song with a scene of women being leered at and being made uncomfortable by a load of pervy old men. Also, there's like that great scene where there's the great moment in that scene where there's the line, "There's never a doubt just who's pulling the strings," and it pans to Matt Smith's character, which I thought was a nice touch. And he's actually hanging out with the man who he punched in the club scene, which I didn't notice until later on. So in terms of direction, the film is beautifully shot, as Jacob mentioned. To lead on to your point before, I agree that the 60s scenes are by far the most extravagant and beautifully color composited and directed, but I feel like that's intentional. It's like a way of showing why Ellie wants to keep like going back to these dream sequences, because she finds like her regular London life, you know, not what she wanted, and you know, this is where she wants to be. So it makes sense, so coming from her eyes, for the 60s to be more visually pleasing. And as I mentioned before, it was great to see his editing used in a more horror context. This is utilised well when the film takes a more sinister turn. So, you know, when in Sandy's, what you assume to be her death scene, there's that shot of Ellie's eyes being reflected in the knife during all the stabs. That was particularly gruesome. And like that style that's serving a purpose, that's serving the characters. Another one is the long take through the backstage at the Rialto, and you see like all the dancers just in tears or being forced to like do all these horrible things and like take drugs to cope with all the stuff that they're going through. So that was a very sobering scene. You almost feel complicit for enjoying the earlier 60s stuff, you know, that was more like nostalgia baiting. It's like it's going, see, this is what it was really like in this time, everyone. And also there's a great sound editing in the bedroom scene where, you know, the Sandy, that's a lovely name, and like all the voices and like the faces start blurring. You know, it really helps to like set up the terror that she must have felt, and like how many times has this happened, and like, you know, I think it goes some way to explaining why she acts the way she does to get out of that situation later on. And this is just like one final point. My favorite cut in this film is lifted straight out of the Cornetto Trilogy, you know, where Diana Rigg's character goes, "Oh yeah, I charge double rent because girls keep taking off in the middle of the night," and Ellie goes, "Mrs. Collins, I would never do that," and then just hard cut to her leaving her student accommodation in the middle of the night. I didn't notice that until the second viewing, and I just fell on the floor laughing. That was
That's brilliant.
Great, yeah.
So, Harry, Hot Fuzz's style. You have the floor.
Thank you. I also just wanted to like point out something, like when you were talking about your favourite track in Last Night at Soho, my favourite is Happy House by Susie and the Banshees. When she's in that. That's my favourite track, when it's sort of, she's just had this experience, this horrible like sort of vision of Sandy, but the love interest, which once again I can't remember his name, like invites
had to
her
stick
out.
the knife in again.
I mean, I did, because I generally can't remember. But like when he convinces her to go out to sort of try and forget about it, where she does the exact same dance that Sandy does in the when she's in the nightclub and seeing all this horrible.
Kidding.
She does exactly the same dance.
That.
Yeah, so Sandy does the dance in the nightclub, in the sort of gentleman's bar, when she's like talking to all these different men. She does exactly the same one as what Sandy does in this club. Damn. Like when, like, I just distinctly remember her sort of arms waving out to the side as the song starts. I think that was like a genius work.
And that's like another thing for her character. It's like, you know how she like repeats all the lines Sandy says, where she's just like, "What's the least I can do? Well, what's the most?" You know, it's just like, I feel like, you know, that serves the character, because it's like that's exactly what a first year uni student would do. You know, that really try hard to emulate your idols. So I never noticed that. I will have to watch that scene again.
Another song which I think is perfectly exemplifies your favorite idea in the film, Gary, with regards to how we glamorize the past and how nostalgic we can be for it, but the undertone's always not so nice. Is I was so surprised when I realized what the song was that's playing during that dance scene, and it's "Wade in the Water,"
Mm.
which is a work song. It's a African American spiritual song that you would associate with singing during the time of slavery. And so it's such a pleasant song to listen to, and the jazz interpretation of it is so funky, but the undertones, the
Mm,
meanings behind it, if you take a closer look as to what it's actually saying,
Mm.
there's a dark past. And so it's as if even when you were in the 60s, you might have been looking back at eras of jazz that came before and think, I wish I was back there. And it's like there's always something a little bit worse behind it if you're looking back with too much favor.
Yeah, so that's a really good point, and thank you for that, Jacob. I will take that.
Oh no,
oh
you're
yeah.
gonna use it.
No, no. So yeah, Harry, you were saying
Yeah.
Hot Fuzz's style.
So Hot Fuzz's style is very like it, because it's the second film in the Cornetto Trilogy, and like it builds upon and like builds upon the sort of foundations of the editing from Shaun of the Dead. Like some of the quick cuts, like in Shaun of the Dead, when they make a simple scene such as him like brushing his teeth and putting his clothes on, like so like cutting and almost exciting. But like they do that in Hot Fuzz as well, where he's just filling out paperwork of what's just happened, and like they've got the music playing in the background of like really quite like rock themes, where it's like the sort of comparison between in the different songs in the soundtrack, like go from when they play like the sort of hard like maybe rock songs, it's to do with like sort of Angel's personality of being like part from the city and being like really like part of the the hardcore sort of crime, and like his nature of sticking by the books and following every rule to the letter, compared to that like so for example at the start of the film you have Goody Two Shoes by Adamant, which is a great song, sort of just prepares you for what's coming. And then you have Solid Gold Easy Action in there, which is Tarek's song, if Baby was saying it. And then it's also there's stuff like Village Green. So it's
Yeah.
the song that's playing when Angel was just walking around the fair, and like even and it's just such a comparison from like the sort of like 70s rock that we get from T-Rex to then calm sort of easygoing country sort of songs. That's by the Kinks, I believe.
Yeah. Do you know, there's an interesting link there with Soho there, Harry. I won't dwell on this too long.
Oh
but,
yeah, it's like
because it's from the same. Yeah, there's a song by the Kinks called "Starstruck," and it's actually from the same album, the Village Green Preservation Society, as the two that are played in Hot Fuzz. So you mentioned Village Green, and there's also "We Are the Village Green Preservation Society." And both those songs are about like missing this old image of like pastoral England, and wanting to go back to it. So that ties into the themes of Hot Fuzz perfectly, and so does Starstruck. Because it's all about like a girl who's like enticed by the city lights and the lure of London, and the guy in the song is like saying, no, it's like gonna corrupt you, you're gonna go crazy, like come back to the Village Green. So I just think like that's really cool how we managed to make two different films and have those songs tie in like perfectly.
Yeah, and I think like as well as like you have the music of Hot Fuzz, I think just like works with the sort of down to earth sort of style of like year when this is set, but the spoof, when you look at the spoof aspect of it being a spoof of like action films, you have like the sort of tropes that are in a few action films, like where they're like hiding behind a tiny bit of cover that they really should be hitting like the person. They do this joke in there's from series called The Naked Gun, which is like an 80s. Is it 80s or so? It might be older. There's like a series. They're like police spoof films. And there's a similar joke in that where there's two people shooting at each other that are really close behind like cover that definitely wouldn't be able to like prevent you from getting shot. It's just like stuff like that they do throughout the scenes and things where I think as a style, like some of the stuff that could be happening is quite gruesome, like but they never dwell on that too much because that's not the sort of point of it. Like when Skinner, Timothy Dalton, ends up falling on the church. That's quite a cringy scene. I could never watch that when I was younger. Like, I always had to like sort of turn away because that's anything to do with like the neck always used to creep me out. But the fact that once you see it, it's then immediately followed up by him going, "Oh, this really hurts!" Like it's like really, he's like the way they have it is good.
I need ice cream.
Yeah, I want some ice cream, and then like, followed by like, all the kids, like all the school kids, just taking pictures of him and going, "Oh!" Like it never shies away too much from what they were trying to do, which was a spoof/comedy of like the traditional action film. That's why I think when you have when they talk about spoofing movies, like they're talking about Point Break, where Keanu Reeves' character just shoots his gun up in the air a load of times and goes "ah," and then when Danny does it, like in a very similar manner, it doesn't feel forced. It's just like nice, like that's really like that's a cool way of incorporating that into the movie without it being. Whereas like if that was sort of in other films, I'm trying to think of an example, but I've seen films where they go, "Oh, I'd love to do this" or whatever. I'd love to be able to do that, and then they do it, and then it sort of doesn't feel organic. It's the same thing with the Danny asks Angel, "Have you ever fired your gun in a high-speed pursuit?" And then when they do it later on, it's like, "Oh, he's finally doing it!" Like it's a cool little sort of callback. But I think it rounds it up in a very perfect way, and it doesn't move too fast. I think some of the coolest stuff is like the Easter eggs of like actors that just pop up. Like Kate Blanchett is in this. Like she's
that's brilliant.
Yeah, she's like his ex-love interest. Bill Bailey plays the two officers by the front desk. That's like it's pretty great.
With different hair.
Yeah, and you just think he's, and obviously like the joke is you think he's just like he's just woken up on like different one day or whatever, but they're two different people. Hilarious. You got the whole bit at the beginning with Bill Nighy, Martin Freeman, and Alan Partridge, where they're all just trying to convince him to go, and just the whole how cleverly the way they do it, like the quick cuts and things where they go, "Well, yeah, I can get the inspector, but he's going to tell you exactly the same thing I just told you." It's like, "Hello, Nicholas, how's the hand?" And then
exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it is exactly the same thing, and it's the same thing with the chief inspector with Bill Nighy. He goes, "Well, you want the chief inspector to come all the way down here? He's just going to tell you the same things we told you." And it's like, "All right, I'll get him." Kenneth, and he's just in the next room, like he's not anywhere, and then again, he says the same thing. "Hello, Nicholas, how's the hat?" And it's just, I think, stylistically, the way that they handle that is just so clever. And I think it's the perfect mix of a spoof and a comedy.
My favourite kind of stylistic feature of Hot Fuzz, and it's kind of a theme throughout the movie, kind of the central idea, is the juxtaposition of the intense kind of Hollywood cop action drama, but in that small town. And the first image that comes to my mind is the kind of roundup montage that we've seen 100 times, but that is a bunch of 15-year-old kids getting taken in because they shouldn't be in the pub, like just harmless, just sitting, just everyone just harmlessly sitting in this pub, and he's rounded up these
It's
kids.
not a victimless crime, Jacob. They deserve to go to prison.
And it's like the montage of them getting their mug shots and just getting like shipped to the station is so funny, because like the banality of what's happening compared to
Yeah.
the the hyper way it's being shot, I think it's excellent comedy conveyed with the style of the film.
And to build off those, like, obviously you have those kids who are just like just in the pub, just there, like how sort of dark it is at the end when obviously the obsession from Frank Bussman, like any tiny little thing they get rid of, like it's like the reason that they kill these people is so tiny, like it's such easily, like those kids are killed at the end, and you see their bodies in like this sort of separate underground area. And it's the same thing with like when they kill the reporter. The only reason they killed him is for a couple spelling mistakes in the newspaper, because it's not all perfect. Like there's no reason like other than that to get rid of him. And it's the same thing with Leslie Tiller, who was fucking murdered. And she was murdered.
That's our one mandatory F-bomb now for this podcast.
Oh, sorry.
God,
It's well used. I won't argue with that.
I should have asked.
That's all good.
I think, like, again, this way that she's just dispatched of, like, they kill her in such a brutal way, but then the only reason was because she was moving house, and they said they didn't want her going to another village so they could win the Village of the Year award. It's just so, like, such a tiny sort of reason, but how twisted it is so good. Apologies, Gary. I did realise that I swore then. You can just censor that out.
Oh, no, it's all good. Yeah. No. The way that they do that in the film is just perfect as well. Like, like I'm just like imagining like the swear box as well. That's genius.
That is hilarious. That is honestly one of the quickest and funniest gags in that film, where they show the prices of what word.
Yeah.
They
and how like
censor
the one
every
word that they
but
haven't
the one word
bleeped
is
out.
The C
The worst
bomb.
one.
It's the worst one. They don't censor it out. Hilarious.
Yeah.
Cracks
And
me
like
up
going
every
on
time.
from like your like all the famous cameos they have. I think my favorite one is like how Doris is like played by Olivia Colman, who has Oscars now, and it's just so funny that
she's
she's
so
just
great.
saying these lines. Like,
Yeah.
are we gonna do any points against the other films, or are we happy to leave it at that, guys?
I'm
fine with how amicable it's been
I know,
so
right?
far.
Yeah.
I'm proud of us, guys.
I was prepped for a fight, you know. I had wires on the gloves, but
Yeah, I'm perfectly. All I wanted to say was, in terms of stylistically, one of the choices of Last Night in Soho is my personal. Like, I've talked about Baby Driver a bit, but like my favourite stylistic choice of Last Night in Soho is the use of the light outside of her room. How she has all the lamps on, where she's sort of in her own world, and then when she switches off all the lamps to go to sleep, the sort of starting point of her transitioning to that world is the flashing sort of red light outside her room. And it's like, that's such a great image, where it's sort of like, and that red light stays there throughout the entirety of the film when she is in this world, when it stays in her room constantly, like when it leads to Sandy like being with these men in that room, and then it's almost like an early warning sign to what happens, how like all the men that she's been with,
yeah, because it's the red for like red light ladies of the night.
Yeah, how they're still sort of there lingering and in that room, and it's just, yeah, I think that's in terms of like how like stylistically it looks, and that's an iconic image that sort of stays in my head.
And the lights are actually on beat for any of the scenes in music in the room, so that's like a little like, it's nothing compared to like the how like
come on.
everything is like synchronized in Baby Driver. It's like a little like reference to it.
It's a flavour of it, yeah.
Baby Driver is incredible when it comes to like that music. Like all of these films, I have all of their soundtracks on a playlist, and I listen to them like from time to time. They're just so good. Like Baby Driver's, I think, most stylistic scene is the bit where you're just going to get coffee, and the words of the song are on the walls and written on graffiti, and just like, oh, that's so genius. Like I remember seeing like just a random word spray painted on a wall. It's like, why was that there? That wouldn't happen. Oh, and then actually seeing
then you hear it. It's so good.
So clever.
That scene has so many fantastic little moments in it. When he's getting coffee, he's taking his left ear pod out as he's deciding what he wants for coffee, and he goes, yeah, 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 while he's just kind of thinking
Hmm.
what he wants. And if you listen closely, the music's gotten
That's when the
quieter
songs,
because he's taken his ear pod
yeah,
out, but he's saying yeah, yeah along with the song.
along
He's
with the
singing
song,
along with it.
yeah, so
It's
good.
so good. And the way you described how he tells the story early on in his films, like as
Hmm.
a little kind of like precursor to what you're about to watch, and the way everything gets turned upside down when Deborah shows up. So in chasing after Deborah, it pulls him away from what he's supposed to be doing, which is getting the coffee for the bank robbers. And everything starts going wrong. He starts, he literally gets hit by a car a few times. He loses his bearings, and it all kind of devolves into chaos. And there's sirens everywhere. And that's a really good kind of symbol for what the story is. And just the way musicians on the street and sirens in the background and every sound that you're hearing, some that you barely even register, are happening in time with the music is so, so cool. And the fact that he's so consistent with that throughout the movie must have taken so much planning, and the way it's all put together is brilliant.
Hmm.
So, I think we will give our closing statements then, guys. So we'll give our closing statements on why our respective film is better and what the other two films lack. If you have any stray points that you weren't able to talk about in the previous round, speak now or forever hold your peace, and we're allowed to counter these points, so beware. So Jacob, why is Baby Driver the best Edgar Wright film?
I remember the first time I saw Baby Driver, as I said at the beginning, I knew I would enjoy it because I do love a good action movie, and I imagined it would be well put together. But I think the extent to which this elevates the genre with its style, the extent to which it leans into the tropes and it embraces them, but it deals with them in such a refreshing way visually and with such unique, succinct storytelling, is so it's so clever, and it makes them such a rewatchable film. All of Edgar Wright's films are notoriously rewatchable. They've got so many little things in them that you won't notice till you've seen it a few times. But Baby Driver, I think, takes the cake for that. And from the dialogue to the editing, the music, I think it really does everything that we love Edgar Wright for to his absolute most. With Last Night in Soho, I enjoyed it. I think the ending is where it falls down a little bit. I've spoken about the love interest character and his motivations. So I kind of have a vision of a film where we find out halfway through Last Night in Soho that it was Sandy who is the killer, because I feel like we know what movie we're watching for most of it. I don't watch trailers, and I still heard the line, "I saw a girl murdered," 100 times in the run up to this movie. I think if that was flipped on its head quite early on, and we really got into the meat of the fact that she's the villain, that would have been a really cool subversion, and we would have had time to dwell on that. But
Hmm.
when that twist comes right at the end, and then we're supposed to then flip it again and feel all that sympathy at the end as well, I think those things come a little bit too quickly, and we don't have time to dwell on those. That's just something I wanted to get in about the story in Last Night in Soho. Towards the end there, I don't think the twist hits as hard as it could if it had a little bit more time to breathe, if we spaced those revelations out a bit more. As for Baby Driver, it's an incredibly snappy film, but I think it's still paced beautifully. And all these films are great, but that one just hits me the hardest. I just love it. I really do love it the most. I'll hand over to whoever's next.
Harry, why is Hot Fuzz Edgar Wright's finest film?
I think it's a perfect sort of summary on what makes him such a brilliant director and what he's all about. Like, it's the criticism towards him saying his style over substance is completely like false, and I just don't think that's it's a fair, valid statement. And it's just evident in all of his films, especially for me, Hot Fuzz, just because I think what it sets out to be, like, you hear, oh, it's a buddy cop spoof film, and you might see, like, if you did happen to watch Naked Gun, these films are sort of a classic sort of spoof but they lean way too hard and sort of silly for me. Like they get really stupid in the human. There's no sort of cleverness to it towards the end of some of them. Whereas with Hot Fuzz, it's just so what you get. You get exactly what you're going for and more so. So it's like you could go in if you expecting a buddy cop sort of spoof of an action film. You'll go into, and you've never seen this film before. You can go in with an open mind and then just be completely like. It's just blown. It blows anything, any sort of expectations that you have out the water, and it's just filled with so like the cast is just so brilliant in the way that they deliver their lines and just it just feels so natural in that sort of world, despite being very that sort of silly in areas and that's why I think it's what's like the magic sort of behind it is how well rounded of a film it is.
Nice one. I'd say that Last Night in Soho is Edgar Wright's best film because it's the first film he's made where his style is married with great themes rather than it being a means of disguising or distracting us from there being a lack of themes or a message. Baby Driver and Hot Fuzz are excellent at what they do, but they're either not going beyond the tropes of their respective genres or just parodying the tropes of their respective genres. And I know that was the intention, but I give Soho extra props for going one step beyond. It's like there's an entire extra thematic level and layer to it that the other two films just don't have. And I'd also say it has more fleshed out and relatable characters. So the point you were making before, Jacob, yeah, I do think, yeah, maybe if there'd been like a couple of scenes where we saw, Sandy like taking her revenge. Maybe if it had been more than just one montage, that would have been cool. But I would argue that part of that is because she's a very well-developed character, so you want to see more of her. And another thing is that I'd say in comparison to other Edgar Wright villains or like anti-heroes in his other, films, I'd say she's still relatively pretty well fleshed out. So I was happy with what I got, basically. Like no one's going to the villains in Hot Fuzz. Oh, I really wish we'd got a bit more about them, because I really wish Doris had more of an arc, but because it's held to a different standard because it's a comedy, whilst Soho is for lack of a better word, a more serious film. So it's being held to a different standard. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes
Yeah,
sense.
absolutely, and that is a really fair point. It's unfair to demand everything of every one movie.
Yeah.
They have their own individual strengths, and yeah, I appreciate that we're not looking at the villains in Hot Fuzz quite the same way. We take them as somewhat comedic, somewhat ironic, and we accept it. So that's definitely fair. I see that.
And so, yeah, it's just I've always been thinking throughout all of his previous films, they're amazing. Wouldn't it be cool if he explored, if he really pushed himself and tried to describe or tried to portray a deeper theme in his films, then they'd be untouchable. And now he has. It's this is the film I always wanted him to make. So this is why, personally, I think Last Night in Soho is his best film.
Nice.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm really excited to see him. If he's committed to going in that direction, moving forward, if he wants to take his style that we know him for, if necessary, tone it down just a little bit and elevate the themes a little bit further.
Yeah,
I think that's a really cool way for him to go, because he's pretty much mastered the art of fun, with the Cornetto Trilogy, with Scott Pilgrim, with Baby Driver. Last Night in Soho is certainly a fun film to enjoy as well, but you're right.
There's just some scenes that are not fun, where Sandy, you think Sandy's just being murdered. It's just there was no opportunity for style. You can't have one-liners because it wouldn't serve it. But yeah, I agree that he's definitely perfected style being used in a more a popcorn film context. And I'm curious to see where he goes next. I like you said before, I'm not sure what his next one is, his next film.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'd love to see if that Baby Driver sequel gets made. I'd love to see it, whichever kind of film it turns out to be, if any. I'd be well on board that train.
We will put Harry and Jacob's respective YouTube channels, so Hazzmat and Within a Theme, in the links in the description, as well as Harry's Twitter and links to their most popular videos. So that's Objection Lol, the Great Iron Man free debate, and How Normal People Makes You Feel. We'll put links in there as well. And there'll also be links to the poll that we're going to put on Instagram, and the link in the description. So where you guys can vote for, who gave the more, who convinced you, like what is the best Edgar Wright film? Is it one of these three, or are we all wrong? Is Scott Pilgrim the best one? Oh, and to end, Harry, I will say Hot Fuzz has one thing that Soho and Baby Driver don't have. What, do you know what that is?
I'll let you say it because you started the joke.
A great big bushy beard.
Excellent.
All right. Till next time, guys. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much for having us, Gary.
Thanks for coming on the show, guys.
You take care.
Take care.
Cool.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.